Welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant. I'm Graham Diaz-Matthews, and for the entire month of September, we're breaking down old Unforgiven pay-per-views as seen on the WWE Network, with today being about the 2006 installment. So opening the show for the Intercontinental Championship, Johnny Nitro defending the gold against Jeff Hardy, and a pretty nice opener. I thought it was perfectly suited in the opening match of the show. Jeff Hardy had just come back to the company, so I'm sure a lot of people probably thought he was winning back the belt here, which was not the case. In the end, Nitro would retain the title via dirty tactics, keeping the feud alive, giving him a big win. And by this point, Jeff Hardy wasn't a former World Heavyweight Champion. He wouldn't win the big one until a couple years down the line. But he was still a pretty established name, and to be able to beat him, for someone like Nitro, who at this period in time was not very well established. I mean, he had held the belt for the last couple of months. I want to say he won the championship in June of that year. He had a nice run as champion, but he didn't really do anything to stand out from the rest of the pack. He was still trying to establish himself as a credible singles performer. And despite having the Intercontinental Championship, he didn't have any breakout feuds to establish him as such. This feud was exactly that. These guys had a great feud over the IC title over the fall of 2006. Many pay-per-view performances, many performances on Raw, leading to that great ladder match on an episode of Raw for the championship. Typically I'm not a fan of rapid-fire title changes, which they did tend to do with these two in the fall of that year. But in this rare instance, it made the belt feel more meaningful because both guys wanted that championship. Jeff Hardy, it really said a lot. After many years away from the company and spending a three-year stint in TNA, came back and he didn't want the WWE Championship. He went up against the WWE Champion on his in-ring return on Raw, up against Edge, but he wanted the Intercontinental Championship. So it really said a lot about that belt, that Jeff Hardy would long for that championship, and that was the first thing he set his sights on when he came back to the company. Nitro, as they mentioned earlier, still trying to establish himself as a credible name. So these two put together, not only did it make sense from a storyline standpoint to have Nitro go over here, but the match itself was pretty good, got a ton of time, almost 18 minutes, one of the longest matches on the entire show. So they got a ton of time. They kicked off the show in a very nice way. And as they mentioned earlier, not the best match these two would ever have. And it didn't need to be because the feud was, and there was still a lot to come in the feud. So kicked off the feud on a very solid start. Nitro, you're still your Intercontinental Champion. So after that, we had Kane versus Umaga. And it was okay. It was a fine match. It's kind of hard to follow up that awesome IC title match. But for what it was decent. I could see why, again, Umaga, fresh star on the scene, had just debuted that year in WWE, and gradually, much like Rusev in 2014, just like last year, when they were giving him the jobbers right off the bat, and then they would give him big name after big name, slowly building him up to be something, and having him face all these credible top-tier performers, essentially is what they were doing with Umaga back in 2006. He went from beating, just job guys every single week, to building up, his level of competition, eventually leading to this feud with Kane that kind of kicked off at SummerSlam when Umaga got involved in the McMahon DX match. Kane got involved to stop him, thus leading to the match on this show. So it was a well-built feud. Just the two didn't have really a lot of chemistry against each other in the ring. Again, not a bad match, fine for what it was, but it could have been a lot better. I'm not saying it had the potential to be great, but it didn't really justified the feud being as long as it was. They would go with the double countout finish here, which was kind of lame, but they wanted to keep the feud alive. Of course, Umaga undefeated. They didn't want to beat Kane off the bat, but I feel like even at this point, Kane didn't mean much. He was still a lot more credible than he is now, but I don't know. I feel like just having him take a loss here, and eventually he would get beat by Umaga, I believe, at the Cyber Sunday pay-per-view to leave Raw. So, it wasn't a complete bust, but still, I feel like, Umaga, just having him beat him here. I understand why they would want to drag out the feud. They want to get more matches out of them, but the match wasn't good enough to justify the feud going on as long as it did. That's just my opinion, though. But anyway, the match ended in a double countout after both guys just got counted out and they left the ring. So that was that. After that, for the World Tag Team titles, the Spirit Squad defended the gold against the Highlanders. Pretty much a filler match. The Spirit Squad, they're a tough one because a lot of people enjoyed them. I was not watching at this period in time, so I cannot speak from personal experience. But just watching them back on old pay-per-views and stuff, the gimmick sucked. And for a long time, they were involved with the McMahons, and they got the main event of pretty sure it was the Vengeance pay-per-view of that year, but they were just made to look like pussies every single fucking week. Every single week, they got the shit beat out of them, despite the fact they had 5 members in their group. The cheerleader thing is one thing. That's a stupid gimmick in of itself. But just the fact they got beat week after week and they would just win these inconsequential matches against guys like the Highlanders, who were a very forgettable tag team. I mean, they had a pretty decent stint in the tag team division, never won any gold, but they were a fine team. But they would just beat these job guys for the championships, and they rarely defended the titles. They got their asses beat every single week during their feud with D-Generation X. I can't remember one single instance where they beat them in a one-on-one or a handicap or a tag team match. Maybe there is an instance that I'm just not recalling, but just from what I can remember, I don't remember one time where these guys beat those two. So to have the titles on them the entire time, not have DX beat them for those championships, was a complete waste. Why not just put the belts on DX? They would eventually win the belts 3 years later anyway, so I don't know, that felt like a missed opportunity to me. But yeah, the match was fine. People just didn't care about it. It was like the Curtis Axel treatment from 2013, almost the exact same thing. That's what watching this match reminded me of. Axel won the belt, good for him, awesome moment, winning it on Father's Day in June of 2013. But from there, for the entire summer, he got his ass handed to him every single week by CM Punk. They had like 10 matches on Raw and SmackDown. He would get beat by him every single goddamn week. To the point where, what's the point anymore? Like, what's the point of having Axel be Intercontinental Champion if he's not going to defend the title? And in every single title defense, he's going to get beat by these job guys. By having him get beat by, CM Punk. Not job guys, sorry. But just... he got beat by Kofi Kingston at one point, just all these other losers. It didn't really make any sense. So that's what kind of this match reminded me of, watching it back, the Spirit Squad versus the Highlanders. Not very bad, not bad at all from an in-ring standpoint, but just having the belts on the Spirit Squad in the first place felt like a massive waste of their time and all the fans as well. So speaking of D-Generation X, they were in action up next in a Hell in a Cell match against Mr. McMahon, Shane McMahon, and the Big Show, in the only ever handicap Hell in a Cell match in WWE. Oh no, that is inaccurate. The only other handicap match other than the Punk versus Heyman and Ryback match we would get in 2013. Also, they almost the exact same thing like I talked about earlier with Axel. But yeah, that's what this matchup was. DX versus the McMahons and Big Show. A lot like the SummerSlam match, I would not rank this by any means the greatest cell match of all time. Not even in my top 5 would I rank this as the greatest cell match of all time. There's just a lot of it, much like a lot of cell matches. I'm not just singling out this one. Mostly brawling, but a lot of it was just entertainment. It was a total bloodbath, taken more seriously than the SummerSlam match, which was like interference, extravaganza all around, with people just from Raw and SmackDown interfering to cost DX the win, and they were ultimately unsuccessful. At least there was no interference in this match. We just had Big Show involved, legally involved, so it wasn't a complete waste to have him just come in and break the cell wall or something. That's the total purpose. That's the entire reason why these matches take place to begin with, is to prevent interference. But anyway, though, I thought the match was entertaining. Exact same thing I said about their match at SummerSlam 1 month prior. It was an entertaining match, but from an in-ring standpoint, it wasn't great. Like, it wasn't a technical masterpiece when you have the McMahons, who other than Shane were not wrestlers, and then you have the Big Show involved too, against DX. It was not the best well-wrestled match of all time, but it was entertaining for most parts of it, and like I said, a total bloodbath. So for that reason alone, it was entertaining. And then they did the whole spot with DX shoving Vince's head up Big Show's ass and everything else. Probably the only memorable part about this matchup, or in this entire pay-per-view for the most part. So they had the one moment in the match. That's probably what they were building to, with the Kiss My Ass Club and everything else. So it was an entertaining match. Not great, not amazing. They took up a chunk of time, almost 25 minutes. Thankfully not longer than the main event, which was a lot better. But still, if you were into the feud, if you're into this thing with the McMahons and DX and you enjoyed the match, if not, probably not as much. But it was an entertaining match, with all the blood they showed and all the brutality throughout the bout. So after that, for the Women's Championship and Trish Stratus' final match of all time, facing Lita for the Women's Championship in her native Canada. So they did have that element to it as well. So she had her hometown crowd behind her. And Trish and Lita always had great matches. I don't know if this was the greatest match they ever had, but it did have a pretty good story going into it with Trish, with this being her final match of all time, going out against one of her greatest, her single greatest rival of all time in Lita. Lita, I don't know how long she had held that belt for, maybe a couple months, I'm not exactly sure. But these two had history for years, and I've talked about this before in past videos and stuff, but they had history going back to 2002, so it wasn't like a year or two, like with much like AJ and Caitlyn a couple years ago. They had history from when they both started in NXT 5 years ago in 2010 up until their Divas Championship feud 3 years later. So these girls had as much history as they did. But anyway, a very well-wrestled match, not the greatest, best wrestled women's match I've ever seen. And that's a thing, too. I feel like I'm not saying people romanticize the Trish and Lita feud because it was every bit as great as people make it out to be. But every single encounter that these two women had was nothing compared to the matches that we see nowadays in NXT between Bayley and Banks, Sasha and Becky Lynch, Paige and Emma even from a year and a half ago. So, I mean, as great of a rivals as they were, I mean, they had better storylines than we see today, even in NXT. But the matches, I feel like, were not as great as some of the ones that we see even today in NXT, which, I mean, really goes to show the potential these women have to be breakout stars on the main roster. It's just all about the booking of how they're perceived by the fans. But anyway, it was a pretty good match. Trish Stratus, I believe she hit the chick kick at one point, maybe the Stratusfaction, but Lita kicked out both times. In the end, locking in the sharpshooter. I'm pretty sure this pay-per-view emanated from Montreal, or at least, I'm pretty sure it's Toronto. I'm not exactly sure, but it did take place from Canada. And Trish Stratus, in her hometown, in her home country of Canada, locking in the sharpshooter. Place goes nuts. She wins the championship. A very emotional moment. They give her time to celebrate with the belt, and she bows out in her final match, for the time being anyway. She would come out of retirement a couple years later, but a very good match from these two. Great moment. I was very happy to see it get as much time as it did at almost 11 minutes, and also take place later on in the show, right before, not right before the main event, but at least the sixth or fifth match in the entire card. That says a lot for the match to take place after the Hell in a Cell match and right before the main event. So that said a lot about the placement and how WWE saw this as a very important match on the card. So after that, we had Randy Orton versus Carlito. A very well-wrestled match. It was a nice match for what it was, not great or anything like that. It just didn't really make much sense from a storyline standpoint because these guys, I mean, maybe they did have a feud. I just don't remember anything, really there being anything to this feud other than, Carlito was babyface at this time. Orton had just got done with his feud with Hulk Hogan at SummerSlam. And I can't remember. I can't remember why this feud even started. I mean, it was a good match. Both guys are great athletes. The RKO out of nowhere and Carlito, that's kind of where the whole RKO out of nowhere phenomenon started. Not, with this pay-per-view only, but this was early on in the time when RKOs were out of nowhere, when it was still a thing, when the whole phenomenon kind of started. So it was a very good match. I'm not taking any credit away from that, but from a storyline standpoint, it just didn't really make any sense. Orton had gone on like fucking third on the card at SummerSlam against one of the greatest, if not the greatest superstar in WWE history against Hulk Hogan. Yet, the following pay-per-view, he would go on next to last against Carlito. So the placement of the match was pretty weird. It probably would have been better served right after the opener, or if not the opener itself. And again, a good match, it just didn't really have any long-term effects, so I didn't care. And there was really no doubt in my mind that Randy Orton would win this match. Carlito's another guy I've talked about before. It feels like they never really had him live up to his full potential. But they had him face Ric Flair the year before this at Unforgiven for the Intercontinental Championship, which I'm pretty sure was the opener. And the following year, he faces Randy Orton, losing both matches. But yeah, I mean, he had a good outing. It's just the fact that I just don't see what the purpose of this feud was. It was probably just kind of a placeholder for both guys. Moreover, Orton and Carlito, they didn't really ever have any long-term plans for Carlito in WWE. Orton, anyway. Oh, he went on to tag team with Edge, a part of Rated RKO. But I don't know why they didn't do that soon. It was a really weird time, so I don't know what they were trying to do with him. But for what it was, though, a good match. So if you watch this pay-per-view only for the matches and not the storyline build-up, this is your cup of tea. So we get to the main event, the TLC match for the WWE Championship. John Cena contended for the gold against Edge. In Edge's native Canada, much like Trish Stratus, and Edge, I mean, it was weird. No, it was Orton, rather, before their match. I thought it was a bit strange, and I thought they had personal heat there for a second, and I forgot to mention this, but it was the pre-match promo before the Carlito-Orton match, where Orton said that he was glad Trish retired, and I'm pretty sure he called her a bitch or something like that. And it was weird because it didn't really make any sense storyline-wise, or so I thought. Then I remember they had a brief on-air pairing, I'm pretty sure, between Carlito and Trish, so that made sense. But anyway, Edge having his grand homecoming in Canada for the WWE Championship, the main event of the pay-per-view, in his match, TLC ladder match, to blow off this long-running feud between the two after just so many months of feuding. Going back before SummerSlam, going back before One Night Stand, going back before Backlash. This all dates back to the very first WWE event of any kind, from what I can remember anyway. I'm pretty sure. Maybe there was a SmackDown anyway. But the first pay-per-view of the year, the start of 2006, New Year's Revolution, when Edge cashed in to win the WWE Championship from John Cena. And that's really where the whole iconic feud between John Cena and Edge started. This was the year of Cena and Edge, if not just Edge on his own. This was his breakout year as a main event performer. So it was very fitting. I mean, I don't know what other match you would have done in the main event. Maybe the Hell in a Cell match. Thank God they didn't go that route. But they did put Cena and Edge in the main event. Very well deserved. An amazing match. They lived up to the stipulation. Edge's, his specialty match is TLC. So they made the most of the stipulation, going all out. I don't know if it's my favorite TLC match of all time, but it's very well up there. These guys work very well together, just in standard singles action. But you throw in tables, ladders, and chairs, you're not going to get it's not going to be too bad. I mean, these guys ended up working with what they had a lot of awesome spots with all three elements of the matchup. And what stood out to me too before watching this, not just the match itself, but during the in-ring introductions, when they announced the Edge was from Canada. I mean, of course, getting a big pop from when he came out. And John Cena, despite the fact this was Edge's hometown, home crowd, whatever, in his native Canada, John Cena was already getting booed by this point anyway. I mean, the whole "Let's go Cena, Cena sucks" chant, the whole Cena hate bandwagon pretty much started, I want to say late 2005, during his initial run as WWE champion. So, it wasn't really any surprise that he was booed by Canada anyway. But Edge, when he came out and got the cheer that he got, the pop that he did from that audience, and it was an extended... I don't think pop even does the reaction justice, because it was an extended reaction to the WWE champion by his hometown crowd, or his home country crowd, whatever it was. But what stood out to me when they were doing the in-ring introductions was that when they announced Edge's name, it looked like he was holding back tears. Now, of course, during the time of this matchup, Edge was a heel. So he had to keep it together, and Edge is an emotional person, as we saw when he retired, when he got inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's not one to shy away from crying when it's most emotional, and this was one of those moments, and he probably realized that he had finally gotten to, not even the pinnacle of his career, because he would go on to win as many world championships as he did in the next 5 years before he retired, but of course, undoubtedly, the biggest match of his career up to this point, in his home country, in his match, in the main event of a WWE pay-per-view for the Raw brand. It doesn't really get that much better than that, other than if it was the main event of WrestleMania, which he would get a year and a half later against The Undertaker, may I mind you. But it was just funny. Not even funny, just kind of cool to see him. I mean, he couldn't break down. He was a hated heel, but he didn't even have that look on his face that he looked like he was nervous as being a character. He looked like he was legitimately about to break down from just being overwhelmed by the reaction that he was getting by the Canadian crowd. I've never heard him talk about that before either. I mean, I've heard him on podcasts with Austin, with, of course, the most recent one with Stone Cold on the WWE Network, a couple with Jericho, and just other interviews and stuff. I just can't remember one instance where he had talked about, of course he's talked about being emotional when he had to make his retirement speech, when he went into the Hall of Fame, and all these other moments, but I can't, or when he, also main evented WrestleMania, not crying, but he was like nervous and amped as all hell. But I've never heard him talk about how he was on the verge of breaking down right before this match. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's kind of what it felt like to me. But anyway, like I mentioned earlier, the match itself was fantastic. Cena taking Edge on top of the tallest ladder in the entire ring, delivering an FU, which was called at that time an AA, whatever you want to refer to it as, to Edge through two tables in the middle of the ring. An amazing moment, an amazing sight, and despite how much people, just hated the idea of John Cena winning back the championship here, it was a great fucking spectacle to see Edge go through two tables off the top of a ladder. It was an amazing sight. And then Cena ascends the ladder, gets the WWE title, and is your new WWE champion. And the show is historically significant because this reign, I believe Cena's third reign, which is crazy to think about. The guy's been a fucking 15-time world champion in the last 10 years. But this was the reign that kicked off his longest reign ever as WWE champion, and the second longest reign of the modern era next to CM Punk. He would go on to hold that championship until October of 2007, so 13 months this reign lasted for. But anyway, the match was amazing. If there's any one match on the show you should check out, undoubtedly this one. Definitely up there as one of my favorite TLC matches of all time. Not just because it was a great match, but also because of everything that was riding on it. Cena, he had to go to SmackDown if he lost. People probably did not legitimately think that he was going to lose this match. I mean, Edge had just beaten Cena on his home turf in Boston, in Massachusetts. So that they kind of had that element too, which was also pretty cool. But just after the entire feud they had that year, and I'm pretty sure they would have another steel cage match on Raw a couple weeks later, maybe the next night, or at least at some point down the line, they would have a steel cage match on Raw for that WWE title. It was a great match. It was phenomenal with everything, with the whole story leading into it, and with this being the year of 2006, being the year of the feud between Cena and Edge. There was no better way to cap off this great pay-per-view. So I enjoyed the 05 installment. I don't know if it was as good as that show, this pay-per-view was, but it definitely had its moments. At least the top 3 matches, in my personal opinion, delivered. The main event, well worth checking out. I mean, you could check it out on Edge's DVD. I'm pretty sure that's where I watched it the first time. He had it on his most recent DVD that came out in 2011, 2012, I think. The Rated R Superstar story. That was a great DVD, and it's on there. It's included on that DVD in the 3-disc compilation. Also, the Hell in a Cell match. Again, not a great match, entertaining for what it was, but it is worth a look. And the Divas match, the women's match, whatever, between Trish and Lita was great as well. And Trish Stratus' final WWE match for the next couple of years anyway, but at least her final match as an active performer of the roster. And also, becoming a 7-time record-setting 7-time women's champion. So made history in that respect as well. So you're taking those 3 matches into consideration. A very good show. The undercard was not amazing. Nitro and Hardy was a pretty good match, but the other matches I didn't really care for. Kane and Umaga, it was kind of a poop match. The World Tag Team title match, okay for what it was. Probably shouldn't have gone as long as it did, but it was okay. And then Orton and Carlito, which I didn't really care for too much because it was kind of a feud thrown together at the last second. It was well wrestled, so you can't complain there. So on the whole, give the show a thumbs up, if not 2 thumbs up. So I will very much recommend checking it out on the WWE Network. So, of course, for the next video, we'll be reviewing Unforgiven 2007, also seen on the WWE Network. But in the meantime, in the between time, you guys can catch me on Twitter at WrestleRant, on Facebook at facebook.com/graham.gsm.matthews. Be sure to check out my website, nextairwrestling.net, for live reviews of Monday Night Raw, and also reviews of SmackDown, Main Event, Superstars, Impact Wrestling, NXT, Ring of Honor, and everything else in between. And that about does it. So be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All support is greatly appreciated. As I mentioned earlier, I'll be back on my next video with my review of Unforgiven 2007. Have a great week, guys. I'm Graham Matthews, and I'll catch you guys down the road.